Welcome back to a brand new episode of Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to this podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will allow you to come back for more. And I'm confident that it will. And for those who are coming back to the podcast, thank you for always coming back. And as always, I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get into the main event, for those who are on YouTube, please make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. And if you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your podcast, make sure you subscribe there as well. And for those who would like to help us continue building this great platform, we do accept donations through Venmo at Kwame SM, or you can do it through Cash App with the handle $IDTALK4ED. And to catch past episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at IDTALK4educators.com. As always, we appreciate the support. All right, people. So we are back. And as I've mentioned the past few weeks, we're going to keep this train going, this AIELOC train going. And we're recording this on the 7th anniversary of AIELOC. And as someone who's been a member for the past almost 3 years at this point, I can't stress enough how significant of an impact that AIELOC has had in my growth, not just as an educator, but most specifically an international educator and, of course, a human being. And there have been many people that I've had the honor to meet along the way who have helped to shape my journey and help me grow and learn more about this international school ecosystem. And today's guest is somebody who has played a role in that. She is someone who's been in the international education game for many, many years. She's been in China, she's been in Uganda, and currently she's based in Tanzania. She writes about international education. She is in the trenches of this work, and it is an absolute pleasure to finally have a chance to converse with her and learn about her upbringing and what brought her into this space. So without further ado, I want to bring on Shwetangna Chakrabarty to the podcast to talk with us about her journey and what led her to do this important work that we're so passionate about. So let's bring her on. Hello.
Hi there, Kwame. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you. I feel blessed that our paths crossed. I have deep respect for the work that you're doing. So I'm very excited and looking forward towards this conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, Shwetangna, and the feeling is mutual. I've been able to read more than one of your blogs and been able to learn so much more about what happens in this international school ecospace. So I appreciate you for just sharing your words to the world and for being so open as you do that, because there are things that you shared in your blogs that are deeply personal, but you've been open enough to be vulnerable to share that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get deeper into the conversation. So as I do with many of my guests, I do my research because that's what allows the conversation to have the depth that's required for the viewers and the audience. And as I was learning about your story and watching everything, the TED Talks and the articles, I'm like, there's so many fascinating things to break down. So we'll have time to do that, but let's start from the beginning. So for those who do not know you, I know that you are from India, but you've also spent time in Bhutan early in your childhood. So would you mind just sharing with our audience a little bit about how you were brought up and your family life as well?
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate and I deeply, I'm thankful that you've done so much of research that's something I truly value, and it just enriches the conversation so much. So, a bit about my background, my early journey into education. Of course, my formative years and my primary education was done in Bhutan. My father was a doctor in the Indian Army, and he had to cover for a post in Bhutan, and we stayed there for a long time. So if you look at, it's like connecting the dots backwards. Right now, I'm working in an international environment, and I see the same challenges. I see myself in each and every student that I come across. Why? Because we have the term third culture kid, so we can define it. And that's why it's important to define, because I can then explain to you my life experiences. But at that time, probably the term was not coined yet. And as I grappled through the dilemma of finding out what identity is or where I fit in, I did have some beautiful experiences, but I went through all those challenges of a third culture kid, learning a new language, getting to know new people, kind of adapting to new environment. Having said that, my journey in Bhutan was beautiful, because the way people accepted you, even though you looked different, you could not speak their language, is something just that makes me humble. I still remember that as one of my biggest life lessons. Interestingly, when I shifted back home to India, I faced something called reverse culture shock. I don't know whether many international educators know that in India we are multilingual. It's just not being bilingual, because your schools teach you two languages, English and Hindi, which is almost the mainstream language, and English is the medium of instruction. But the third language that we speak is our mother tongue, the place that we belong to in India. So I belong to the eastern part of India, where I'm a Bengali, and the state is called West Bengal, and I speak the language Bengali, and I used to speak Bengali and English, and I never spoke Hindi. So when I came back to India, that was something I had to pick up. And what was challenging was that this made people judge me, the way I'm speaking, or not being able to adapt, or not being able to pick up the language. And that judgment actually made me reflect a lot. It is painful, but I believe somehow, now that I look back, the challenges actually shape your personality, because then you try to reason, why are the challenges in place, and how can you be a better person, or how can you make yourself feel comfortable. One thing I would like to, and I would love to share, and I always say that, when we try to fit in, we try to be alike with people around us, we try to conform to popular choice, and that'll always remain a struggle. If you keep trying that, you will keep trying that throughout your life, and you'll never get contentment, or you'll never be satisfied. What people respect and what they're interested in is your unique identity. So bring your full self in. If you can't talk the way they do, that's fine. They'll find it interesting, hopefully, because I think it's human nature that we are all inquisitive. And finally, we believe in the goodness of people. So throughout my journey, that's what I encountered. Every time I tried to fit in, I failed miserably. And this failure made me realize the best way forward is to bring your full self, how you are and how you are most comfortable. So that's one of my earliest lessons in life. And that could happen because I had the opportunity to live outside my own comfort zone, or outside my own country.
This is great because I know in your TED talk, you talk about the importance of unpacking that question, where are you from? But listening to your story, it's clear that you reached a point where you recognize who you were. So I'd like to ask you, at what point did you finally have that epiphany about who you were as a person, your full identity?
You know what? It's a journey. I wouldn't say at a certain point, but throughout this journey, and like I said, the more challenges that you face, the more judgment you face, the easier it becomes for you to dig in and ask yourself who you actually are. And I think that can be that roots back to your value system. And I believe, and I strongly believe that my parents have been my most influential teachers, and seeing the way their dedication to their profession actually inspired me. And one of the values that they taught me is kindness. And this value kind of helps you navigate through so many situations. So when you're looking for an identity, as I said in my TED talk, identity is not singular. It's a confluence of various factors: race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status, your experiences, your lived experiences. So then all of this comes together and makes your identity. That's why your identity is a story. And I also think that identity in terms of purpose, identity is defining who you are, but purpose is also defining why you are there. And the who and the why kind of come together when you are trying to define your identity. So, your purpose and the confluence of various factors that shape you is your identity. That's why the easiest answer is, how do I know who I am? I know for sure it's not a singularity. And I'm very sure of that. And I keep defining myself based on my experiences. So, and this identity intersects with my role as an educator, role as an editor, or any other project that I take on, because it gives or it empowers me to understand my role, my purpose in this environment.
And as you were talking about that, you mentioned that your identity is very much intersectional, just as it is for all of us. There's so many parts that come into play when we're talking about identity. So there were a couple of thoughts that came to mind, and I'm even thinking about my own upbringing, where both my parents grew up, were raised in Ghana, moved to the States after high school, started a life, and started a family. And that's how I was born. But I always felt like it was a struggle because of the judgment, the external messages that I was getting from classmates, the microaggressions I was receiving from them, as well as some of my teachers and other people. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I realized, if my cultural values are still instilled in me, why should it matter where I'm based geographically? And I think that was something that you were alluding to when you were talking about that importance of the fluidity, how you recognize that identity is fluid and it's not just bounded by geographical location or where you're currently based.
Absolutely. Like I said, identity is beyond the narrative of just one singularity. And the beauty of recognizing that is is what helps you define yourself. So when somebody asks that, oh, where are you from? I try to help them. Now I have come to a situation where I try to help them understand what's my purpose being there, rather than just saying that, oh, I belong to a certain place and associating and then deepening their biases. Because usually that's what people are trying to do. That's my understanding. We somehow feel threatened by differences. Sadly, that is the situation. That's the reality of our world right now. And what we educators, and here I'd like to mention AIELOC also, and TIE, and the whole movement towards this awareness of justice and diversity and equity and equality, is the fact that what threatens us, you have to reflect deep into your experiences. And once you have realized that, you have to make sure that you make other people around you, you see, you identify people who are still struggling with this kind of insecurity. You try to help them by not answering that question, by not relating your identity to a place, to a race, or by not confirming their biases over and over again. So you then come to have a conversation. You then come to make a relationship to build a connection. And that all comes together when we define your purpose well. For example, I was at the AIELOC conference, and I intentionally or on purpose do not ask people, where are you from? I rather ask,
That's right.
what brings you here? So that starts that critical conversation where you actually get to know that person. What's their purpose here? What brings them here? And those are the conversations you value and you learn from them. There's so much, like I learned that you run this identity talk. You're doing such a great job bringing educators and their experiences and sharing with the wider community. Yeah. And if I had not met you, if I had not asked why you are at the conference, I would have just known that you just come from a place and you work at a certain organization, and that's it. So, one thing I would like to share is I believe, and I have seen through my experiences, that as a human race, we are stunting our growth if we limit ourselves to our biases or to what we know and we stop learning. To get out of this vicious circle, you need to intentionally know people for what they are, for what they represent. And that's why the first step is to move away from where they come.
And I think that's what you're alluding to when you were talking about the echo chambers. And we all have these echo chambers where we take at face value these narratives or notions that have been instilled in us, whether it's through schooling, whether it's just through environmental factors, or just what we see or witness where we are. And one of the things that I've come to realize about social justice work, anything dealing with DEI, DEIJ, or any of the iterations that you want to use, right? It's
Yeah.
all about breaking down those echo chambers because there are so many things that we end up internalizing by design that
Yeah.
as adults, we're still trying to break down and unpack and unlearn. And that's something that takes time. And I think that's why when we look at performative activism in this space, we're critical of it because we recognize the amount of work that has to happen in order to get to a place where we recognize these truths that you're sharing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to make it as easy as possible to understand, to start from a point which probably all of us ignore. And there is a lot of activism happening, but it starts from self reflection. And why I really feel aligned to this talk of yours, because it roots itself from identity. And I believe that unpacking your own identity is the first step towards understanding the work, towards understanding why certain things have been internalized and what was the idea behind it, and how can you make sure that you work and you overcome these biases. For example, when we talk about working in an international environment, the struggles we face as educators of color, right? So how do we make sure that we are a voice that just doesn't talk about um, the overall harm that has happened? We also dig into the factors which have put that harm in place. What is the idea behind fighting this? Whom are we supporting? What's the final purpose? What's the objective? And dig into your role in that entire space. That as an individual, you have so much to contribute, that your voice matters, and the fact that you want to empower others through your story. Somebody will relate to your story. And then at the same time, are you identifying educators who are doing that kind of valuable work? Are you bringing them to the forefront? One of my jobs as an editor is to consciously look for other educators who have been doing this work. And like you said, that, this is about a story about unsung heroes. The the awareness that we are trying to build will go down if we do not empower each other's voices. So whenever I come across such stories, I try to bring it to the front and make sure that their work is recognized or at least shared with our wider community of educators. That's how we'll inspire. And if you go down to very grassroots levels where there are new people coming into the work and they're not supported or they feel alone and they do not find affinity groups, we absolutely have AIELOC, and thank God for that. And we are celebrating 7 years,
Yes.
and it's a huge success. But why is it a success? Because we are not just looking at our own stories. We are empowering each other. It's a community. It's hand holding, right? The movement is not about I. We have to move away from the I. It's about we. We are in this together. And the future is we. The future is not I. Looking at dominant culture, the harm that has done to people of minority or people who have been oppressed, these stories need to be discussed, and there are no two ways about it. We have to be courageous in saying our stories. At the same time, we have to reflect into what our purpose is, and that's where identity plays a big role, because I feel I bring with me, I represent a lot of things which are visible, right? Because identity is related to the external, superficial, and people judge you on that. But you also carry a responsibility from where you come from, what your to what people relate you to. So, for example, if I speak a certain language, I do have a
Yeah.
responsibility to showcase that language. I do have a responsibility to spreading the message that what are my challenges and what are my strengths at the same time. I come from a value system and I must remember that value system. I cannot just agree to a new value system because I'm trying to fit in. I have to make sure that whatever has built my identity remains prominent and remains recognized. I do not forget it, and I don't allow people to forget me.
And that is important. And you make sure people don't forget you because you always remember where you come from. And in saying that, I know you came from a family that was privileged to have an education. Your mom being the first woman graduate in the family, and then you mentioned your father being a doctor in the Indian Army. I'm wondering if seeing these images at a young age inspire you to want to become an educator, or were there some other factors that allowed you to make that decision on going down this path? So I'd love to hear more about that.
Thanks for that question. And I reflect on this question time and again. Why education? Um, the inspiration, of course, comes from your family. Your formative years actually form your vision for your life, your objective. So my parents have been my most influential teachers. And like I mentioned, their dedication to their work actually inspired me to do something where I can see a positive impact. My you talk about privilege. I think when I was a child, in terms of socioeconomic status, I wouldn't consider myself as privileged. But in terms of academia or access to education, yes. I think the country had also come to a point where most of the middle class people were able to access education, and I'm very fortunate to be one of them. So the access to education makes things more clear, gives you that opportunity where you can think of inspiration, whether you can think of a career. And my mother was a teacher, and the relationship she built with her students and people around her, the same for my father. The dedication they had to their work. He, at any time of the day, be it midnight or whenever he's called, he would report to duty just to help people. And I debated between being a doctor, being an educator. I tried to be a doctor, but that's a very interesting story for probably some other time. And it's it's also impacted by how different countries put boundaries. My story of being a doctor, I'll just very briefly mention it. I got an opportunity in the medical school in back home in my country to continue or pursue being a doctor, but they did not admit me because my dad could not prove that he belongs to that particular state. So there is a criteria called you have to be a domicile of the state. Since he didn't own a property in the state, I could not be admitted. So that was one of the first challenges I had to face as somebody who is constantly in transition, who cannot say that I belong to this particular place. So now you can connect the dots and see that you face so many challenges, being continuously in movement from one place to the other. So what I learned from that process is it does not define my ability, but at the same time, I have to navigate the boundaries created by countries, created by politics, created by dominance, created by so many other factors. So then I quickly switched gears, and then I did my computer programming. I got into programming, worked into programming for some time, but then realized, like I said, I didn't see the impact. I didn't see a positive impact. I didn't get to meet people. I didn't get to know their stories, which was our family background. We would always have people coming over, and the idea of entertainment was to share each other's stories. We were not so affluent that you could go out for dinners or throw parties, or which is a norm nowadays, entertaining. But the simplest thing we did is just sit down and chat and share each other's life story and make connections. So I was deeply missing that. And then this opportunity for getting into education made me realize I need to then sharpen my skills. So having completed computer application undergrad studies and my master's in business administration, I got back to school to do my teacher licensing, and I got into education. But trust me, I've not stopped since then. And that's where I found my soul and growth, because I truly enjoyed it. I loved being in an atmosphere which is so diverse, where I can see a positive impact, where I'm helping shape a child's journey, and where I'm learning constantly. Because as an educator, you will realize the hardest thing is to teach someone. Yeah. And in the process of teaching, we learn more than anyone else. And every day we are informing our own practices based on the context that we are in. So these things keep you inspired throughout your life. And having moved through so many places, I've really enjoyed the cultural heritage that I've experienced, the backgrounds, the people that I've met, the friends that I've made, and they have given me a family outside my family. And I remember in one of my blogs, I reflected on this. Most of the countries that I travel, I'll find a friend where I can live with, and it's just such a special connection that you can relate, and you see their kids go through the same journey, and you are part of each other's journey. You have helped each other, you have held their hand, you've empowered each other to survive in what I consider is a harsh environment, because you're not just accepted that you've arrived and you're accepted. You have to carve your way in. You have to build your credibility, especially if you are a person of color. That's the reality. And when you know that reality, you actually help people around you. If you meet someone, and I see this, sorry, I'm maybe digressing a bit, but it's important to share. As a leader right now, with so many years of experience, when you see a newbie joining and they are still in that flux, in the doubt, the first thing that happens is self-doubt. And as ambassadors of true identity, of people who support each other, who are here for a positive impact, we must identify people who are coming in. I think that's a urgent task. And as I'm traveling, I'm seeing this more and more. Has to be removed. There has to be systems in place which do not push new educators of color to develop this self-doubt, to get into a nutshell, to be quiet, to accept. This is something I'm actively working towards, that I dismantle this system, that I build confidence. And in that process, I gain more confidence in the work I'm doing. And that's why I reach out for support. And right now, the conversation that is happening here is giving me more confidence, is giving me more support. And I hope that we are able to pass that message to the entire community, to whoever is seeing this.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. And what's apparent to me is that you've always had to live a very transient lifestyle, starting from your early days as a third culture kid, going to school, and then having this career in international education. Also, coupled with the fact that you are a woman of color, what I'm interested in knowing from you is how do you go about creating those spaces of belonging, knowing that you're not in your home country, you're always in another person's country, and you're learning their culture and you're going through that cycle. So, what is it like to create a space where you feel comfortable and you feel like you belong?
What an excellent question. In multiple ways, I've tried to push this message across that the first thing is recognizing if you're a woman of color, you will be judged. You you have to recognize that first. And one thing you have to remember, if there's something which makes you feel uncomfortable, you have to speak up, because that's where most of the voices get stifled. There have been so many incidences, and I'll just give some examples, like mansplaining. You try to put an idea forth in a leadership team, and the leadership team ends up explaining it to you. And that should make you feel uncomfortable, because nobody is valuing your ideas, nobody is valuing what you bring on the table. And you have to voice it. So to voice it, you need a bit of courage, you need a bit of support. That's why I said you have to develop a support system. Unfortunately, that is where we are right now. Identifying a support system brings that confidence. And then you have to remember, you will be recognized for the work you do, not because of your allegiance or agreeing to common belief. It'll just take you a few steps forward, but it's going to stunt your growth. So have confidence. When you feel uncomfortable, speak up. That's the first step towards actually bringing your true identity. The international education environment is a harsh environment for women of color, because you're not only judged uh, based on who you are, but also the fact that probably you will not be able to make decisions. So at this point, I'd like to mention constantly being aware of the research that's happening in education. Constantly, I have accepted this, that you have to go an extra mile. You have to learn more. You have to be at par with what's happening in the industry, so that when people challenge you or push you in the corner, your knowledge will actually help you come out of that situation. Being true to your work is another way of getting over these challenges. And finally, remembering your purpose. We are there for the students, and whatever is good for nurturing their growth is your priority. It does not matter if you meet resistance, because resistance is built in this whole system if you come in as a woman of color. So be prepared to face resistance, but at the same time, be prepared to speak out when you're uncomfortable. That's the first sign of understanding that you have to fight against some nuances, some biases, some systems that are in place to oppress you. So, some simple strategies that I always keep in my mind, and this really helps me navigate. Then, creating those systems of support around you. Um, and always sharpening your skills. Sometimes I say, unfortunately, we just can't rely on what we have learned because because of the environment that's been created. We have to keep learning. We have to keep sharpening our skills to be heard. So that's where I am right now, and especially in leadership. There is something in leadership which pushes you to give up very soon, because again, it's about fitting in, right? You don't see many people like you. So first step, there are so many things to consider: recruitment and policies in school. So at a macro level, there are so many things to be considered, and that's happening. My um, my strategy right now, and why I'm talking to you right now, is to empower educators at the micro level. As an individual, what can you do? What do you bring on the table? That's necessary to understand. Because if you fail on that confidence and you keep blaming the system, that the system is oppressive, there's nothing I can do, you are losing the battle. You recognize you bring in a lot of power, you are there for a purpose, and then you start identifying these oppressive systems, naming them, and doing something about them. This has to be the plan of action.
And I appreciate you for your candor in talking about this. And another thing that I believe is important to note is that you are a mother. You have a son that's going through this international school ecosystem. And if you don't mind, I want to go ahead and present one of the recent blogs you wrote regarding the journey that you and your son have had to travel through this ecosystem, because it's important to highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and project that. So for those who are listening, I'm just projecting Shwetangna's blog focused on the journey. So bear with me as I do that. And here we go. All right. So for those who have not been on the TIE website, the International Educator, you can find it there. I had a chance to read this blog, and one thing I want to say is, actually, I want to commend your son for being so persistent and resilient in the midst of some of the medical challenges that he had to go through. And for those who haven't read this blog, you'll know more about it as you read it. But it's been a trying journey. But thankfully, he is now at university now, continuing his studies where he should be. But I think when you talk about the importance of showing up, the importance of remembering your purpose as an international educator, I think as a mother, you do it because you want to set that example for your own children so they know how to navigate said system. So I would love to find out from you as a mother, how do you go about building self-efficacy in your own son and help him own his identity within this white dominant culture that is designed to dictate how we're supposed to be seen in this space?
Yeah, I think, this is something which brings back a lot of emotions. And I think I'm at my vulnerable best now, which I truly appreciate, because I think vulnerability is our superpower as educators of color. And to answer your question, to build self efficacy, uh, be it my son or any other student that I meet in a classroom who's struggling with this, who's been oppressed by white dominant culture or a dominant culture that's existent, I encourage them to embrace their abilities, like multilingual abilities. Embrace it. If you have an accent, that's because you know more than one language, and embrace it. Don't try to fit in and learn a new language just because your friends speak the same voice or the same way. And the most important thing, make choices that reflect your identity. I'll give you a simple example. in a kind of dominant culture where I'm sure you know the IB curriculum very well, and those educators who know, I'm just going to provide a bit of context. Students are usually told to take 3 higher levels and 3 standard levels. My son opted for 4 higher levels, and he was questioned over and over again. Why is he doing that? What's he trying to show off? And it's become a narrative that if you are aiming towards excellence, that is because you come from a certain culture, and that is because that culture dominates you, that culture forces you to then take on more challenges which are academic. I would say no. I would say that it doesn't force you, it inspires you. And that's my identity. And I must reflect it in my choices. So if my son decides to take 4 higher levels, and this is at again micro level, I will support him. And if he fails in that process, he will learn from it. And that's fine with me. So, embracing your choices, which comes from your identity, is very important. At the same time, like I said, it makes me vulnerable, it makes me emotional. You have to brace for impact of the failures that are there in place or that might come moving forward. It's about supporting your child or supporting a student to navigate the system and assert their place within the dominant culture, ensuring that his story is his own narrative and not imposed upon him. That when he says who he is not based upon a choice that was given to him. It is based upon what he truly feels at that moment, what he values at that moment, and that he has the courage to explain it to others. So, and through his journey, Kwame, to be very honest, I've had most of my learnings. And to kind of separate yourself from being an educator and a mother was one of a big challenges that I had to face, at the same time navigating these oppressive structures in international education. So that's a way of looking at it. At the same time, what happened when you bring your true self in the picture? People respect you, and he got all the opportunities thanks to that. So I'm very thankful to all the opportunities that he got just because he had the courage to understand where his strengths are and how he should apply it. So when he wanted to try out for, there's another interesting story I would like to share with you. When he initially started trying out for being in the football team, he would find himself alone of a particular color, and he was always assigned one job, the extra or the goalkeeper, and never part of a team. So he comes one day, and he was very young, and he comes one day, he was an avid football fan. He would watch all the matches, and he was on top of all statistics, and he would say, Mom, I want to become a footballer who sits on the bench. Why? Because I'm getting good practice of it. And I'm like, I, I didn't know how to react because he was celebrating it. And I was so proud of him at that moment that he enjoys that. He has still not understood why he's repeatedly being, judged and made to sit. It has nothing to do with his abilities because they were not tried and tested. That's what happens to us. We are made to sit on that bench, never given a moment to try, to show our abilities, to show our expertise. So the idea of building affinity groups is to make sure right now that what's happening is I'm getting a platform to speak up, to speak about my experiences. And I want that for all the students out there, and I want that for all the educators out there. And at that age, I was not able to tell my son why he's sitting on the bench, but I did encourage him that try out. Why don't you also try out, shooting at the goal? Or so what ended up happening is, and again, it's all about connecting dots. He started at the age of probably 10, a club which would just go out in the evenings and do this football trials and shoot at the goal and record those videos and put it up on Instagram. And it was like there are hardly any followers to the channel. Let me be very clear about that. But it was a huge favorite amongst his friends. So they would all come on Saturdays and shoot in the goal and take their turns and record it and put it on social media. Now, when he got into university, he applied for a job, and they read in his bio that he used to run this channel, this Instagram channel, and he got an interview call based on that channel. And when he shared that with me, we were laughing. I said, "How many followers do you have?" And he said, "Maybe 10 or 15. That's it." Doesn't matter. What matters is what experiences you've had, what you've learned from your challenges, and how have you been able to make that challenge an opportunity. That's important to me. And somewhere down the line, I trust in destiny. I trust in what we are the purpose that we are here for, and everything, I think, at the end comes together if you keep trying, if you keep looking for opportunities, if you keep looking for growth, everything will come together at the end. And I'm not saying this is the end, but these are small examples which inspire us and which tell us that if you do not give up, and if you keep to your core identity, and if you assert your place in a dominant culture, you will come out successful.
And while that's a heartfelt story, the underlying lesson that he's teaching, I don't even think he realized it then, is that whenever we come across these adverse situations, there's always an opportunity to rewrite that narrative. And he certainly did that by videotaping himself and running this club. And look at what the results were as a result of him taking that initiative to rewrite that narrative that he didn't even realize existed just
Yeah,
because
and
of the age he was at that time.
absolutely. And like, I would also like to highlight one more thing in this whole story is that, when you're forced into these challenges, what people don't realize is actually you're giving an opportunity away. Because my son learned time management. My son learned how to organize himself at a very early age, because you know he didn't have the privilege. So actually, you look at it as an opportunity. Pushed against the wall, try and look at it as an opportunity and come out in your best colors. And in that process, it's a process of metamorphosis, and believe in that process. So if you're struggling, and if something is demotivating, and you find yourself in a situation where there is no way around, and you're alone and you're stifled, just know that this is part of the process, and you're fighting it, and it's gonna make you it's cliche, but a better person.
Yes, it will. And I have a couple of questions. And this first one is one that just came up as you were mentioning affinity groups. And this is my take on them. I still believe that affinity groups are important to have in any school, especially an international school. But I also feel that affinity groups have become performative. They've become, in essence, that diversity quota, if you will. Okay, let's show that we're a diverse school. We're going to just start an affinity group. And what ends up happening is they get created, but then the transformation that we're pursuing doesn't always occur because of the way the school structure, because of the different powers and forces that are within the school that hinder that from happening. So I would love to get your take on just affinity groups and how we can do a better job of implementing them with fidelity.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something that we are all grappling with, because in many senses it's new, right? So seeing a positive impact, yeah, takes time. But I truly believe as a leader, that systems need to be put in place, and they should not be people dependent. They should be sustainable on their own. So if you define the right policies, if you define the right objective early on, it doesn't matter who's in the group. They have to be very sure of their purpose in the group so that it does not die out and you don't forget why you are in an affinity group. An affinity group is, like you mentioned, not just there for, ticking a box or making sure that we are also part of this narrative. We are now, it's mainstream discussion, so it's fashionable to have an affinity group. But defining the purpose, making it a sustainable system in place, that it has a purpose for a bigger benefit. And what's our core job as educators in international education is to give space for students, for learners from different backgrounds. If that is our first objective and that's well defined into the purpose of an affinity group, then we'll steer away from just the group being there to probably have a discussion over some popular culture or something that's very current on social media, because sometimes that's what happens and you have to steer away from that kind of a danger. So having policies, even though it's an affinity group, there has to be a clear direction and a clear purpose. It all starts with a strong leadership in place. So again, going back to institutional systems that are in place, they need to be dismantled in a way that there are supportive environments. And affinity groups are basically supportive environments. When one of the reflections that I've had from students over and over again in my conversations, and I have led DEIJ clubs, or I've been part of it. And one of the main reflections that students say is that they do not relate to anything that they see, that they hear, that they learn. So affinity groups should form that type of a support system where students can relate to the work that they're doing, the learning that's happening. For example, and this is something I always keep discussing, when you are in a school in any country in Africa, the history that you're learning. Why are we learning European history? Why is African history not a priority? Simple questions. So the purpose, if it's well defined, and the purpose, if it's rooted to student centric growth, then you will always find these affinity groups being a sustainable system. And I think that's what we need to remember. So and we've talked many times about including literature into our curriculum. The work starts from the curriculum. That's our core skill, implementing and delivering a curriculum that is contextual. So recognizing the need and how these affinity groups inform that need, what part they play is important. And that's where I would also say there's a danger of creating affinity groups and just being there to tick the box. I'll also be vulnerable and share something with you. Recently, I did put out a call out there for an Indian affinity group, Indian educators. The first question that came to me, what defines you as an Indian educator, right? And that is going to be our first discussion in our group. How do you identify towards this particular name which calls you an Indian educator? So our journey does just begin, but our core purpose here is to create a support system for educators so that it impacts their work, impacts the student learning. And I think that's where we start from. So hopefully this will continue. A system will be in place where there's a positive impact on international education. That's my hope.
I just love how this conversation keeps cycling back. And I just have all these questions popping up, but this is going to be the last question before I get to the final question, because it's one that I feel like we need to pose. So you mentioned that DEIJ system building work shouldn't be people dependent. I totally agree with that. But then I'm thinking about the fact that in international schools, we've already documented the transient nature of this work. And sometimes when you're trying to sustain these systems that are rooted in DEIJ, the architects or the people who champion the work end up leaving for their next post country, and they take that intellectual property or those principles along with them. And so you are now starting from scratch. My question to you is, do you believe that a major reason why we're not seeing more systems rooted in DIJ sustain the international schools is because of the transient nature of this work?
It is, but the fact that we have recognized the transient nature, what are we doing about it? So, if you look at organizations
Right.
like CIS or AIELOC or IB, the first thing that they want to tackle is the policies, is the school policies, right? So, if you have to create a system, you have to start there with the mission and the vision, how that impacts the school policies, and how that can support the DEIJ work. And like you said, it's called DEIJ, but overall a bigger picture of inclusion because we are in an international environment. So how do we ensure that policies and systems are in place so that inclusion is our priority? And now a lot of organizations having realized that, having put in systems like accreditation work, now forces schools to look into their systems and highlight or underline the work that they're doing. And this is a stepping stone, this is the start. Otherwise we don't want it to be a suitcase curriculum that, you know, the architect of this whole plan moves with their resources in their suitcase from one place to another and it's all forgotten. No. So that's why I said at the beginning, it's not about I, it's about we. It's about developing the system in place, putting it in place. Even if you move, it continues, the good work continues. It can only happen, and when we look at it, you have to institutionalize. So you have to go back to the roots where all the problems started, and you have to plant your seed there. You have to say that these are the policies necessary to have inclusion or to move towards a more inclusive environment. There are a lot of resources available online, and I would prompt all educators to look for it, how to educate yourself to building in this system. It's not about individual work, it's about building in strong institutions so that this work can continue no matter who the architect is. The architect inspires, right? Brings in inspiration and has gives a voice, but then should leave the legacy, should leave the system in place so it can continue, so that there's sustainability. Sustainability is key. I mean, I'm rambling here, but it's all about sustainability. The world is focused towards ideas, policies in place, so that sustainability becomes a priority. We don't forget the good work that we are doing and the purpose.
All that very true. Can agree with you more. All right, Shwetangna, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. And my final question to you is, how do you stay true to the teacher in you?
um, that's a hard question to answer. I would like to believe, and this is not self propaganda, I would like to believe that I am a reflective practitioner. And the feedback that I get from my students actually helps me, maybe not better, but maybe more useful to the context that I am in. And that's why I always try to reach out to everybody that I'm working with, be it my team, my supervisors, and my students, creating a culture of trust where people can give me the feedback that helps me grow. So that keeps me rooted and true to my purpose, because finally we are educators, right? Our core purpose is teaching and learning, and weaved into this purpose are so many nuances, which we keep making sure that we are navigating easily. I would like to say that when we are moving towards a more globalized world, we need to understand how are we equipping our students for that globalized world. What experience do we bring in? Our stories, how are they impacting our students? So I think that is what keeps me rooted. And student stories, when you build a relationship and when you get to know their challenges, each and every person has such a unique story. Just because they are in an international environment, they are out of their comfort zone, and it's beautiful. So I would say that be a compassionate educator. That'll keep you grounded and rooted to the work that we are supposed to do, bring into international education. And remember that learning is an emotional journey. So if you don't build that relationship, you can never be true to yourself. Yeah, bring
Absolutely.
in your truth. I'd like to, I mean, we're almost at the end and I've talked for a long time. I've absolutely enjoyed it. But recently I was reading something, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a book that I read, and it talks about vulnerability as a superpower. And I am right now reflecting and practicing that. That really keeps me rooted to my purpose as an educator. And yeah, I would like to hear if people have similar experiences, and that gives me courage. So be vulnerable for any feedback that you receive, and be true to yourself by being more compassionate. Remember your core purpose in education. I hope that I am rooted. I hope that, what I'm saying is actually what I do.
And I think that's the most important thing. And even if there are missteps, at least you have the humility to say, I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and I'm going to do something to rectify whatever's happening. And that's really the mark of a learner. And for that, I thank you for always pursuing that, for always modeling that in everything you do, whether it's through your writing, whether it's through your speaking, or any other action that you put out there in the world. We receive it, and I know that I appreciate it, which is why you are here. So, for those who can also appreciate it, let's let them know where they can connect with you so they can receive this positive energy that you bring.
Thank you so much, Kwame. I have so many things to say before we end. And one of the first things is thank you so much. And you're doing a great job. Continue this work because it impacts so many people positively. So thank you so much. And connecting, if you have the intention, you can find me anywhere on my TIE blogs. The best place to connect is, of course, on LinkedIn. If you just type my name out, I'm sure you will find me, or on the TIE website, or you can just email your stories. And this is an opportunity I want to give out to people, to educators who are doing great job out there. Do write to me at editor@tieonline.com, because one of our core purposes is to empower voices, is to share the stories, is to make people aware of all the work that educators are putting in, DEIJ work, innovation, and conversations about AI, so many other things which we are still debating. This is your opportunity to reach out to me, to make sure that your voice is heard, to share the good things that's happening, and also in the process of sharing, to learn. So yes, LinkedIn, and you can directly email me at the Thai Online editor email.
Shwetangna, thank you so much again. And we're gonna have to do a part two at some point because there were so many other things that we could have talked about, but we'll table it for another time.
Absolutely, Kwame. And I hope I get this opportunity to be on the other side of the table and to know your story. So, because that's my purpose, to learn from your story. We will continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yes, I would love that. And please have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And continue with the great job that you're doing.
All right, people. So we're about to end another fantastic episode. Do y'all feel full after this hour? I know I do. Y'all have to feel full. There was so much that was shared that I feel is going to bring value to all of our lives. So if you are listening, make sure you share this with a friend. Let them know how this impacted you. And for everybody else, as I always say, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, and good night wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.